When you hear the word schizophrenia, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For a lot of us, it's genetics, right? Like it's some kind of biological lottery. But what if that's not the whole story? Not even close. Today, we're going to be digging into the epidemiology of schizophrenia to uncover the social clues, the ones hidden in the world all around us. So let's start our investigation. And the source material itself calls it this multifaceted and mysterious disorder. And that's really what it is. For decades, scientists have basically been playing detective, trying to piece together this enormous puzzle of what causes it. Look, we know genes are a huge part of the picture. That's a given. But the evidence we're looking at today asks a different and I think a really powerful question. It's asking, what about the world outside of our DNA? What factors in our environment, in our cities, in the way we live might actually shape the risk of developing this incredibly complex illness? All right, so to guide us on this investigation, here's our roadmap. First, we're going to frame the mystery. Then, we'll hunt for clues across different countries and even through time. After that, we'll zoom in on one of the biggest clues out there, the surprising link to city life. And finally, we'll connect all the dots to figure out what it all means. All right, let's officially begin our investigation. So the main tool for this kind of detective work is something called epidemiology. And if you're not familiar with it, just think of it as detective work for public health. See, epidemiologists don't just look at one person. Nope. They look at entire populations to find patterns, the who, what, where, and when of an illness. All of that helps them uncover the why. And while genetic studies are absolutely crucial, what epidemiologists have found is that some of the most compelling clues for schizophrenia, well, they aren't just buried in our biology. They're hidden in plain sight, in the social and physical world that we live in every single day. Okay, so where do we even start looking for these clues? Let's go big. Let's go global. Our first big question is this. Does schizophrenia look the same everywhere? Is it some kind of universal constant, or does it actually change depending on where you are in the world? A landmark study by the World Health Organization called the 10-country study gives us a really fascinating first clue. At first, it looked like it confirmed the old idea that the rate of classic, narrowly defined schizophrenia was pretty much the same everywhere. But, and this is a big but, when the researchers broadened their definition, a pretty startling difference popped up. The rates were nearly double in developing countries. Whoa, that was a major twist in the story. But wait, it gets even more surprising. That same research uncovered another huge clue. It turns out that patient outcomes, how well people actually recovered from the illness, were consistently better in developing countries. This was just a groundbreaking discovery. It suggested that social factors, things like really strong family and community ties, could be playing a powerful protective role. It opened up this whole new idea that the social environment isn't just about risk, it might also be a source of incredible resilience. Okay, so we've established that geography matters a lot. Now let's switch gears and look at history. Has the risk of schizophrenia always been the same, or has it been changing over time? Some people have even asked if it's becoming a disappearing disease. Well, a whole bunch of studies from the 70s through the 90s seem to show a pretty noticeable decline in new cases. And that just added another layer to the puzzle, right? If the illness is partly environmental, what in the world changed during those decades to cause a decline? Was it better nutrition, improvements in healthcare for mothers and babies? But as you've probably guessed, the story isn't quite that simple, not at all. Other studies from that same period found no decline whatsoever, and a few even reported an increase. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the risk isn't static. It goes up, it goes down. It really suggests that there are powerful environmental forces at play, pushing that risk around in different places and at different times. And that brings us to what might be one of the most consistent, most compelling clues in this entire field, the connection between schizophrenia and city life. I mean, the data on this is just remarkably clear. Study after study shows that being born and raised in a city significantly increases your risk of developing schizophrenia. We're talking about doubling the risk in some cases, compared to growing up in a rural area. That's huge. And what's even more fascinating is that researchers found what they call a dose-response relationship. So what does that mean? It means it's not just if you lived in a city, but for how long. The risk actually accumulates. Just being born in a city is one streak, but the more of your childhood you spend in that urban environment, the higher and higher the risk gets. It's almost like the city itself is a kind of cumulative exposure.
Okay, so what is it about city life that could possibly be having this effect? Well, researchers don't think it's one single thing. They believe it's more like a cocktail of different environmental factors all mixed together.
All right, so here are some of the prime suspects that are being investigated. In cities, you have a higher concentration of things like infectious diseases, pollution, and the potential for poor nutrition. You also see higher rates of complications during birth. And then there are the psychosocial factors we all kind of think about, that chronic stress, the constant noise, and maybe most importantly, social isolation, the breakdown of that tight-knit community feeling. And that, right there, connects directly back to that global clue we saw earlier. The very social cohesion that seems to protect people in some parts of the world might be the exact thing that's missing in others. So, we've looked at clues from geography, from history, and from city life. Now it's time to bring it all together. Let's connect the dots.
And really, the overwhelming conclusion from decades of this kind of research is that the old nature versus nurture debate, it's just obsolete. It's not one or the other. Schizophrenia really seems to be the result of a complex dance between a person's genetic predispositions and all the environmental factors they're exposed to throughout their life. So if there's one key takeaway from all of this, it's this. Schizophrenia is not just a biological lottery. Our world literally shapes our minds. The evidence is just so clear that our social and physical environments, where we live, when we happen to be born, the communities we're a part of, all of these have a powerful, powerful influence on our risk for serious mental illness. And all of this leaves us with one final, and I think incredibly important question. If the very fabric of our environment, especially our cities, can increase the risk for an illness like schizophrenia, it forces us to ask, how can we do better? How can we start designing and building communities that don't just house our bodies, but that actually protect and nurture our minds?